It's the funeral of a young man of 26.
O God, all that you have given us is yours, as first you gave Bob to us. Now we give him back to you. Receive your Son into the arms of your mercy, and raise him up with all of your people. Receive us also and raise us into a new
He had been
life.
asleep
Help us
in a
to love
faraway
and serve
land
you in this
for
world,
60 years.
we may enter your joy in the world to come. Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend this your Son. Acknowledge, we humbly beseech you, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming.
His name was Robert Warren Langwell, an ensign in the United States Navy. He has returned home after 60 long years. On June 24, 2009, at the United Nations Command in Korea, a ceremony was held to return the remains of an American soldier.
Many remain so today. Often referred to as the Forgotten War, those who were here, those who fought on the hills that surround us, those remains we recognize on the field today will never be forgotten.
He was a U.S. naval officer who fought in the Korean War in 1950. But he went missing at sea in October of that year, and nobody had seen him since. He was one of 8,000 American soldiers who went missing during the Korean War. Robert Warren Langwell. In 2009, he finally returned home. "60 years ago, war erupted on the Korean Peninsula on the eastern edge of Asia. And the United Nations decided to dispatch its forces to the conflict, sending 1.94 million young men from 21 nations to Korea. During the 3-year war, 45,000 UN soldiers were either killed or missing in action. The United States sent the largest force at 1.78 million strong. The remains of some 8,000 American soldiers are still missing today. Currently, 2,300 Allied soldiers are interred at the UN Memorial Cemetery in Busan.
Take it home.
Remember when we used to go sledging when the snow was high? Yeah. And he used to put me in the front, and then we used to go in a snowdrift, and I used to have to go back home because I was covered in snow. And ask somebody look after me with the dance hall, then pick me up after. Oh, dear.
And you've got 4 grandchildren, and you've got 6 great-grandchildren, and they're beautiful and they send their love to you. You'll be very proud of your son today. He laid the wreath for the United Nations. Very, very proud.
Rest in peace.
But there are those who must long for their loved ones without even a grave to remember them by.
There's no graves here. Just father, my father. All missing in action. All these guys are missing in action. I was 5 years of age. The telegram said that my father was missing in action, presumed dead. And when they mentioned father in the telegram, I realised what a father was. And I remember the day he left because he was shaving, and fathers shaved. And he was in his uniform in front of the mirror, shaving. I can feel his presence. This is as close as I've ever got. But it was closer yesterday. My brother survives, and my mother survives, and they're back home, and they'll know about this, because the ambition is to recover his remains.
The missing men may never come back, and this has left an indelible scar on their families. The fighting has stopped, and the fields and mountains of Korea have all but erased the traces of the war. The memories of the war may be faded now, but its wounds have not yet healed. This is a team from the Korean Ministry of National Defense's Agency for Killed in Action, Recovery and Identification. It is their job to find the remains of the soldiers who disappeared. This was once the front line of the Central War Zone. Fighting was fierce in this place, and its traces can be found everywhere. It is May 2009. The hills of Pungsanri, Chuncheon bustle with activity. Soldiers move quickly, with purpose. They are searching for the remains of an American GI.
미군이 여기 낮에는 누르고 밤에는 화천으로 나오고 아침에는 일찌감치 들어와서 포를 쏘고서 하면은 그러다가 실이 5시만 되면 또 철수하고 그랬대요. 소를 가지고 갈다 보니까 빼다고 하나 나오더라고. 그러니까 이거 틀림없이 이건 산소구나. 이거 건드리지 말아야 된다. 그래 전혀 안 건드리던 거죠.
The memories of eyewitnesses may be faded, but they are the most important clues. For years, the U.S. has been looking for the remains of its soldiers who went missing during the Korean War.
The brand name on this is Parker, USA. And remember back during World War II and during the Korean War that for soldiers, writing letters was very important. That was their only way to communicate back home. And it was very common for American soldiers. I often find pens associated with American remains.
작년도 한미 간 체결된 MOU 이후에 조사에서부터 발굴까지 전 과정을 처음으로 한미가 함께한 첫 케이스로서 전사자 유해 발굴 사업의 교류 협력의 새 장을 여는 좋은 본보기라 하겠습니다.
Can you open?
There's a lot of
moisture and
Although they found a few personal effects of fallen Americans, they were not able to find any remains. The search for the missing began much too late. It's been a decade since the Agency for Killed in Action, Recovery and Identification began their work. Although the remains of 13 presumed UN soldiers were found, only one set of remains was ever identified. This is Mount Suri in Gyeonggi Province. It was the scene of fierce fighting between joint American-Turkish forces and the Chinese. A pair of unique combat boots has been found here.
이쪽으로 좀 발가락뼈가 밑으로 흘러내렸어. 전라도로. 밑에 거 하나를 붙인 거예요. 원래 전투가 아니고 밑에 거 수레에서 붙였어. 수레에서 붙였고 여기에 있는 이 징 못으로 박혀져 있는 것은 우리가 처음 발굴했다. 원래는 원형으로 되어 있는 것은 소련제 전투하고 다이아몬드형은 우리 유엔군 전투인데 이곳은 현재 그런 유형을 벗어나는 전투화 형태로 지금 발굴이 된 겁니다.
This tattered boot is thought to have once belonged to an unknown Turkish soldier.
그 숫가마터에다가 그 아군하고 그 군인 저기 미군하고 거기다 한 군데에다 묻었다가.
This is Dongongni Valley in Hwangsong. It's a place where 9,900 Korean and 2,400 American soldiers were massacred through relentless Chinese and North Korean bombing. Most of the remains found here have been badly damaged. At least 2 sets of remains are buried here together. A dog tag is discovered amongst the remains. Who is this unknown soldier who has been buried here for the past 60 years?
이 K라는 것은 이제 코리아 한국이라는 뜻인데 아마 그 당시에 그러한 미군 부대에 가서 근무했던 한국군의 인식표며 지금 여기 나온 유해들이 바로 그분들이 아닌가 이렇게 추정이 되는 중요한 유품이 되겠습니다.
A man reported that he buried remains of fallen soldiers 40 years ago.
앞에 쫙 터이가 있을 때 그때다가 이걸 상자 묶고 우리 소대원들이 이제 절을 했는 데 있어요. 요쪽이 하고 요쪽 두 군데에서.
He claims to have buried the remains underneath this radio tower.
71년도 아마 6일경 될 거예요. 그 당시에 이제 전차 호작업을 하는데 6월이 막 나온 거죠. 미국 사람의 커피 하고 그 다음에 이제 수푼.
Although it's estimated that 2 or 3 remains are buried here, all that was present was frost-covered earth.
그게 이쪽 방공호에 있는지 이쪽 방공호에 있는지 그걸 모르지. 밤에 일로 미군이 저녁 먹고 얻을 때 우리 집에서 저로 탈려오는 거를 쓰라고는 거 안 되니까 쏴서 죽으니까 이제 끌어다 집어넣은 거야. 그래서 묻어버린 거야.
An American POW who was shot trying to escape is said to have been buried in a trench dug deep beneath the levee. But the rice paddy had already been rearranged multiple times. The terrain was a meter lower than before, and they could find no sign of the old trenches.
너무 섭섭해 억울하고. 찾아줬으면 참 그 가족들이 무척 고마워했을 텐데 기대하고 왔는데 그게 아니네. 진짜 섭섭하네 형.
지형도 변화되고 이분들 나이도 많이 드셔가지고 기억력도 쇠퇴하고 또 그 지역에 가면 그 지역에 계속 상주했던 분들이 별로 없다. 이게 가장 큰 문제예요. 그래서 우리가 이 사업은 시간과의 전쟁이라는 거지. 정말로 2, 3년 내에 우리가 어디에 묻혀있는 것만 정확하면 그거 찾는 건 문제가 없어요.
Many of the fallen still remain behind in this faraway land, unable to return home to their loved ones. This is Yeongdeok, North Gyeongsang Province. Mr. Kim Tae-sang has spent almost his entire life working at sea. Although he has spent countless days at sea, he still vividly remembers that day 60 years ago. He had gone out to sea with his nets like every other day. But his net wasn't heavy with fish that day. It was heavy with something entirely different.
여기 나왔답니다. 여기. 처음에 이랑 나가가지고 아침 먹고 나가가지고 걔가 바로 그거를 올라온 게 무거워가지고 아이고 위에 이걸 뭐가 들었는지 이걸 무겁노 이러면 도와 올렸다고요. 도다 올릴 거는 결과는 열받아 보니까 신체가 누웠는데 야 이거 뭐 딴 거 올라온다. 그래 그 신체를 건져 올릴 거래. 그 아래로 붙은 옷을 입고 군화도 큰 게 신고 이 야마가다 두나 이거 빨간 거 두나 팔에 붙이고, 이건 구인이다. 구인인데 한국 사람은 아니다. 이 신체 보니까 이건 미국 사람이다. 바로 저 나무 밑에 전부 다 나무 있는데 바로 저 양재바다에 저거 했습니다. 그 따뜻한데 조합해가지고 그거.
Fishermen believe that those who perish at sea deserve a proper burial. So the fishermen buried the foreign soldier on a sunny plot of land overlooking the ocean.
사체를 갖다가 저기다 갖다 묻어놓고 진로 통과 여기 앞으로 지나가면은 저거 옛날에 내가 어떻게 해 묻었구나. 저 손질로 해가면 내가 가면 오면 저 누이 잡고 거리 가전다고.
The young fisherman who buried the body all those years ago is now old and wrinkled. And many years have gone by since then. In April of 2009, the Agency for Killed in Action Recovery and Identification visited Yeongdeok. Although reports aren't always correct, the team is hopeful this time. The remains finally reveal themselves. And they are intact from tip to toe.
거의 48.5.
그렇습니다.
48.5나 49까지 되네.
그렇습니다.
이 정도면 아마 키가 180 될걸?
176에서 180 사이 정도 될 거예요.
그럼 이 정도면은 동양 사람보다는
서양인이 가서.
서양인이 가서 많잖아.
그렇습니다.
His boots were placed by his feet.
완벽하게 Made in USA라고 완전 역적이는 Made in USA라고 해서.
They are one step closer to unraveling the soldier's identity. They find a wallet with the remains. Will this help identify him?
이제 이름이 있어, 이름. 요게 이름이 아시면 여기 이름. 로버트 워렌 랭웰이라고 하는
Robert Warren Langwell. This is the name on the naval identification card. His teeth are relatively well preserved.
금류로 보칠이 되어 있는.
They are the most definite way to identify remains. He was laid to rest here, far from home, in a foreign fishing village.
차려. 보국 영영제 경례.
Now, he will finally be able to return home. First, the remains are inspected in Korea. After a thorough examination, the information is sent to the soldier's country of origin, which is determined through his dog tag or other identification.
그래서 이제 정밀 감식을 통해서 동양인의 특징이 굉장히 없고 서양인의 특징, 얼굴이 좀 좁다든지 코가 굉장히 높다든지 뭐 코쿰이 요 밑에 부분 나자시리하고 그 부분이 굉장히 높다든지 또 그 치과적인 것이라든지 아니면 아래턱이 좁고 또 이런 특징들을 가지고 저희가 일단은 인종적으로 이분은 동양인보다는 서양인의 가능성이 있다라고 판단을 했고요.
The most important evidence is the teeth. Because each set of teeth differs in size, shape, crowns, and other characteristics, they provide valuable information that helps distinguish the individual. This is JPAC, the Joint Prisoners of War Missing in Action Accounting Command. The data from the investigation of the remains found in Yeongdeok is re-examined here.
Once the anthropologist does the biological profile of the skeleton, we also we have 3 dentists on staff that'll do the analysis of the dental remains. They analyze for characteristics, the number of teeth, and the restorations or the fillings that are on that teeth, on that skeleton. And what they'll do is take the profile of the analysis that they've done of the skeleton in front of them, compare it to an ante-mortem record of an individual they think it is, or record of a person before they died. And if there's concordance, if there's a match, then we can say that that could be the same person. If there's not a match, then we can say dentally that's not the same person.
These are JPAC's records of Ensign Lengwell. They are his dental records from his time of service before he fought in the Korean War. The shape of the teeth, the crowns on the molars, the implants, and the cavities all match the results found by the Korean team.
We had good information as several artifacts were recovered with Ensign Lengwell that had his name on it. Dentition was very good, so we were able to make a dental identification using his teeth comparison to his dental records. And so we were very, very fortunate in being able to make the identification.
Ensign Lengwell served on the USS Magpie. In October 1950, while Ensign Lengwell's ship was working to remove naval mines 3.6 kilometers from Chuksan Harbor in Yeongdeok, it was sunk by an enemy mine.
He was a Navy sailor, and he served on the Magpie, and he was a new officer, an ensign, which would be like a second lieutenant in the Army. So he was one of the officers on board the ship. They ran the ship, much like a captain of an airplane. So that was his background, and before that he had been in World War II as an enlisted sailor, and then became an officer.
A man who lost his life at the tender age of 26. Ensign Robert Warren Lengwell is finally returning home after 60 long years.
Gray buildings belong to the North Koreans or KPA?
In 2010, Korean War veterans and their families visited Panmunjom.
Over here you see the
North Korean visitors like we are here in the building?
They have visitors and they use the T2 building just like we do.
Although the war is over, the conflict between the two nations continues on. There is a thick air of tension here. The joint security area is a symbol of the two nations' animosity toward each other. Countless lives were lost in the fierce fight for this land. And many soldiers still lie asleep beyond the fence in that forbidden zone.
Back in May of 1951, I was with the 2nd Infantry Division, and we were told that there were 12 Chinese division in front of our division, and they was going to wipe our division out. But we were lucky. We was up there in Inje, Yanggu, Chuncheon, Hongcheon, all in that area. And then we waited for the Chinese to attack us again. And then the artillery let loose. After we killed so many, we moved back again. And that was how we were able to stop the Chinese offensive. But we lost a lot of men.
다 같이 하겠습니다. 일동 차려. 묵념.
Nary a soul has visited this forest in all these years. An unknown soldier has been buried here alone and forsaken. But the people of this nation were preoccupied with restoring the ruins of war and had no time to bring these men back home. It is only now that they are being remembered.
여기 스푼 타락 나오죠, 스푼. 요 스푼은 지금 유엔군 스푼이에요, 유엔군. 미군이 사용했던 여기가.
국가를 수호를 하려고 그 여러 나라가 그 우리 한국 전쟁에 참여해서 자기 그 목숨을 이렇게 희생하면서까지 한국과 민주주의를 수호하려고 하는 노력에 대해서 다시 한번 가슴 깊이 느끼게 되는 계기가 됐습니다.
This is Hill 735 in the Central Combat Zone in Chuncheon. The countless bullet holes in the rock tell of the intensity of the battle. Another set of remains is found here.
그 포탄에 의해 가지고 절단된 거야, 다리가. 어?
예.
절단잖아, 봐. 포탄에 의해 가지고.
A dog tag is also discovered here.
스미스 SMIT 스미스?
예.
스미스 프랭크 FRANK 프랭크.
The name on the dog tag is Frank Smith. There is a ring on his finger, most likely a token of love from someone special. The soldier who had been laying here until long after the fighting had come to an end. He is finally getting ready to go home. In July 2010, the remains of Ensign Langwell of the United States Navy were returned home. It's a homecoming 60 years in the making.
There are still almost 1,000 Americans who are unaccounted for in the Republic of Korea. We would like to recover as many of those individuals as possible, but we understand how difficult that's going to be, and we understand without the assistance of the Korean people, it will be very, very difficult to find the burial locations of these Americans. And so we have investigation teams who canvass the countryside, talking to Korean citizens, asking if they might have any information concerning the loss of Americans.
$8,024. This is the exact number of Americans who have still not returned home from the Korean War. We met with Ensign Langwell's family in Washington, D.C. Mrs. Mary Parker is Ensign Langwell's aunt. Although her husband is gone now, he had always longed for the ensign while he was still alive.
Yeah, this is my husband is Mr. Langwell's uncle, and my husband's sister was Robert's mother.
Although they were uncle and nephew, they were the closest of friends from their childhood until they joined the service. Mrs. Parker's husband had always believed that Ensign Langwell would return home.
I just remember that he was a good-looking young man, and that he was a couple of 3 years older than my husband. And my husband said, though, that they were raised like brothers and that they fought like brothers. And he said that he could hear somebody play a tune on the piano or sing it, and he could sit down and play it, or play it on the horn or on the piano. He was very good at hearing music and sitting down and being able to play it.
Ensign Langwell was born in 1924 and died in 1950. But it was in 2010, many years after his death, that his funeral could finally be held.
Eternal and loving God, we praise you for the great company of all those who have finished their course in faith and now rest from their labor. We praise you for those dear to us whom we name in our hearts before you, and especially on this day, we praise you for Bob, whom you have graciously received into your presence. To all these, grant your peace. Let perpetual light shine upon them, and help us so to believe what we have not yet seen, that your presence may lead us through our years and bring us at last with them into the joy of your home, not made with hands, but eternal in the heavens. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Escorted by 30 naval ceremonial guardsmen and 6 white horses, the casket is carried on an old caisson. Ensign Langwell is laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery, accompanied by a solemn, traditional ceremony. He was a soldier who answered the call of his nation and fought in its name, and Old Glory is presented to his loved ones in solemn dignity.
Surprised, grateful, and the only regret we have that his mother never knew that he was found or anything like that. She's been dead since 1980, so that was... She really grieved quite a bit before because he was her only child. But we are very grateful to be able to do this.
The names of the fallen cover the walls of the war memorial. Although the only record of some of them are the small letters engraved here, the living resolve never to forget them.
Where did I find Richard, okay. Yeah. We grew up together in Hawaii. When he went in the service, he was 17 years old. Because we were young and we had no work, he joined the service. After basic training, he went to Japan. He got stationed in Japan. When the Korean War started, he was with the first group of Americans to come to Korea, and he was one of the first Hawaiians to get killed. I'm sorry, I got emotional. Yeah, he was the first Hawaiian, I think, to get killed in the Korean War. Richard Ina.
This man came to Korea in the place of his mother, to pay his respects to his uncle who never returned home from Korea.
Right here. God bless you, Uncle. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Uncle, for your courage and your love for the Korean people. We don't know where his body is at, and we're looking for his remains, and we're hopeful one day we will. We're believing we're going to find his remains and burying him in National Cemetery in Washington, D.C.
There are those who pray that the fallen will not be lonely, no matter where they are, and that someday the missing may return home to their families and loved ones. We hope and pray that the souls of the brave men and women who sacrificed their lives in this foreign land may rest in eternal peace.